I'm Henry Thompson. I'm 74 years old, and those cruel words came from my daughter-in-law, Victoria, just as the lawyer was about to read my deceased son's final wishes. Listen to this story until the end, and please share it with anyone who needs to hear it. Tell me afterward which part truly moved your heart, and let me know what city you're listening from. Right now I'm sitting in my old Buick outside the law office, watching through the window as my son's family divides up his life without me. People who called me Grandpa Henry just months ago, now treating me like a stranger who wandered into the wrong building. You know what hurts the most? It's not being excluded from my own son's will reading. It's not the humiliation of being told I don't belong in my own family. What hurts the most is knowing that my son David would be rolling over in his grave if he knew how his wife was treating his father. I remember when David was 8 years old, and he made me a Father's Day card that said, "My dad is the best dad in the world, and when I grow up I want to take care of him like he takes care of me." I still have that card in my wallet, faded and worn from all these years of carrying it with me. Well, David never got the chance to take care of me like he promised, because cancer took him away at 45 years old. And now his wife Victoria is making sure that his father has no place in the family he left behind. My wife Eleanor passed away 3 years ago after 51 years of marriage. We raised David together, sacrificed for him, loved him, supported him through every challenge and celebration of his life. When Eleanor died, David promised me that I would always have a place in his family, that his children would always know their grandfather. "Dad," he said at Eleanor's funeral, "you're not losing a family, you're gaining one. Victoria and the kids, we're all your family now. You'll never be alone as long as I'm alive." Those were his exact words, spoken in front of Victoria, in front of my grandchildren Emma and Tyler, in front of everyone who mattered. But David isn't alive anymore, and apparently his promises died with him. Let me tell you how we got to this point, because this betrayal didn't happen overnight. It's been building for the 6 months since David died, ever since Victoria realized she didn't need to pretend to like me anymore. David was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 18 months ago. The doctors gave him 6 months to live, but he fought for a year and a half, determined to see Emma graduate high school and Tyler make the varsity baseball team. He was always a fighter, my boy, stubborn as a mule when he set his mind to something. During his illness, I was there every day. Every doctor's appointment, every chemotherapy session, every sleepless night when the pain was too much for him to bear. Victoria was there too, of course, but she had to work, had to take care of the kids, had to manage the household. I was retired, so I became David's primary caregiver. I moved into their guest room so I could be available around the clock. I learned how to manage his medications, how to help him when he was too weak to walk, how to make the protein shakes that were sometimes the only thing he could keep down. For 18 months I was David's shadow, his support system, his father doing what fathers do when their children need them. Victoria seemed grateful for my help during those dark months. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Henry," she'd say when I'd take the night shift so she could get some sleep. "David is so lucky to have a father like you." But I started noticing changes in her attitude as David got sicker, as it became clear that he wasn't going to beat the cancer. Little things at first. She'd make family decisions without consulting me, even though I was living in their house and helping care for David. She'd have conversations with David about finances and the future that would stop when I entered the room. The biggest red flag came about 2 months before David died. I overheard Victoria on the phone with her sister, talking about when this is all over, and how she was going to finally have her house back and not have to deal with Henry's constant hovering anymore. Hovering. That's what she called my devotion to my dying son. Hovering. I confronted David about it the next day, told him what I'd heard, asked him if Victoria really wanted me out of their lives after he was gone. David was weak by then, spending most of his time in bed, but his eyes flashed with anger when I told him what Victoria had said. "Dad," he said, gripping my hand with what little strength he had left, "I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. You've sacrificed everything to help me through this, and I'm not going to let anyone push you aside when I'm gone." That was the last serious conversation we had about the future. David died 2 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep, with Victoria and me holding his hands. In that moment of grief, Victoria and I clung to each other, united in our loss, both devastated by the death of the man we both loved. But the unity didn't last long. The funeral was the first sign of what was coming. Victoria planned everything without asking for my input, even though David and I had talked about what he wanted for his service. She chose a modern funeral home instead of the traditional one where Eleanor's service had been held. She selected music David had never liked instead of the hymns he'd grown up singing. She wrote an obituary that barely mentioned me, referring to me only as Henry Thompson instead of his devoted father. When I tried to speak at the service, to share memories of David as a boy, as a young man, as the son who had been the center of my world for 45 years, Victoria cut me off after 3 minutes. "We need to keep things moving," she said, even though we had plenty of time and other people were speaking much longer. After the funeral, Victoria announced that she needed space to grieve and asked me to move out of the guest room. I understood, or thought I did. Grief affects people differently, and maybe having me around was too painful a reminder of David for her. I moved back to my own house, the house where Eleanor and I had raised David, where every room held memories of our life together. It felt empty and cold after months of living in David's house, surrounded by family, feeling needed and useful. Victoria promised to bring the kids by regularly to maintain the relationship between their grandfather and them. "The kids need you, Henry," she said as I packed my things. "You're their only grandfather now, and David would want them to stay close to you." But the visits became less frequent, then sporadic, then almost non-existent. When I called to ask about seeing Emma and Tyler, Victoria always had excuses. They were busy with school, with sports, with friends. They had homework, they had plans, they had other commitments. When I did see them, usually when I showed up unannounced, the kids seemed distant, uncomfortable, like they'd been told something about me that made them wary. Emma, who used to call me every week just to chat, barely made eye contact. Tyler, who used to beg me to throw baseball with him in the backyard, claimed he was too busy to play. 3 months after David's death, Victoria started dating. I found out not from her, but from seeing her Facebook posts with some man named Richard, a successful businessman who drove a BMW and wore expensive suits. In the photos, Victoria looked happier than I'd seen her since before David got sick. I wasn't opposed to Victoria finding love again. David had been gone for months and she was still young, still beautiful, still deserving of happiness. What bothered me was how quickly she seemed to be moving on, how easily she appeared to be replacing David and everything that had been their life together. The final blow came when Victoria announced she was selling David's house and moving in with Richard. "It's time for a fresh start," she told me over the phone, like she was discussing the weather instead of dismantling the home where my son had lived, where my grandchildren had grown up, where I had spent the last 18 months of David's life. "What about David's things?" I asked. "His books, his tools, his personal items? What about the kids' connection to their father's memory?" "I'm keeping what's important," Victoria said dismissively. "The rest is just stuff, Henry." David wouldn't want us to be tied down by material possessions, but David would have wanted his father to have some of those material possessions, some tangible reminders of the son I'd raised and lost. When I asked if I could go through his things before she got rid of them, Victoria said she'd think about it and never brought it up again. That's when I realized that Victoria wasn't just moving on from David. She was erasing him, and she was erasing me along with him. The call about the will reading came last week. Victoria's voice was cold, businesslike, nothing like the grateful daughter-in-law who had thanked me for caring for David during his illness. "Henry, David's lawyer wants to read the will next Tuesday at 2 p.m. You should be there since you're mentioned in it." Mentioned in it, like I was some distant relative who might get a small bequest instead of David's father, who had been the most important person in his life besides his wife and children. I arrived at the law office 15 minutes early, dressed in my best suit, the one Eleanor had helped me pick out for David's wedding 12 years ago. I wanted to look respectable, dignified, like the kind of father David would have been proud to claim. Victoria was already there with Emma and Tyler, sitting in the lawyer's waiting room like they owned the place. The kids barely acknowledged me when I walked in, just quick nods before they went back to staring at their phones. Victoria didn't even look up from the magazine she was pretending to read. "Hello, Victoria. Emma. Tyler." I tried to keep my voice warm, grandfatherly, the way it used to be when I was welcome in their lives. "Henry," Victoria replied without looking up. Emma mumbled something that might have been "Hi, Grandpa," and Tyler just nodded again. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, came out to greet us and lead us into his office. He was a kind-looking man in his 60s, someone who had probably presided over hundreds of these family meetings, some happy, some heartbreaking, some contentious. "Please, everyone take a seat," Mr. Peterson said, gesturing to the chairs arranged in front of his desk. "I know this is a difficult time for all of you, but David was very specific about his wishes, and I think you'll find that he put a lot of thought into taking care of his family." Victoria sat in the chair closest to the lawyer's desk, with Emma and Tyler on either side of her. I took the chair at the end, feeling like an outsider at my own son's will reading. Mr. Peterson opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. "David updated his will about a month before he passed away," he said, looking at each of us in turn. "He wanted to make sure all his affairs were in order and that his wishes were clearly stated. A month before he died. That was around the time I'd told David about overhearing Victoria's phone conversation, around the time he'd promised to make sure I was taken care of. My heart started beating faster, wondering what provisions David had made, what promises he'd kept, even from his deathbed. "Before we begin," Mr. Peterson said, "I want to make sure everyone who should be here is present. Victoria Whitman Thompson, Emma Thompson, Tyler Thompson, and Henry Thompson. Is that correct?" "Actually," Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp and cold, "I need to clarify something before we proceed." Mr. Peterson looked surprised. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. What do you need to clarify?" Victoria turned in her chair to look directly at me, and the expression on her face was one I'd never seen before. Pure contempt, like I was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "This family has no place for you, old man," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone in the office to hear. "David is gone, and with him, any obligation we had to include you in our lives. You're not welcome here, and you're not part of this family anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Peterson looked shocked, Emma and Tyler looked uncomfortable, and I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "This family has no place for you, old man." The words echoed in my head like a death sentence. "Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Peterson said carefully, "I'm afraid I don't understand. Mr. Henry Thompson is specifically mentioned in David's will. He has every right to be here for this reading." Victoria's face flushed red with anger. "I don't care what David wrote in his will. That was before he really understood how much Henry was interfering in our lives, how much his constant presence was affecting our family." Interfering. Affecting their family. I had given up 18 months of my life to care for my dying son, and Victoria was calling it interference. "Victoria," I said, my voice shaking with hurt and confusion, "what are you talking about? David asked me to help him. He wanted me there during his illness." "You took over our house," Victoria snapped. "You made decisions about David's care without consulting me. You acted like you were his next of kin instead of his father." "I was trying to help," I said, feeling tears start to form in my eyes. "David was my son. I loved him." "Your love was suffocating," Victoria said, and her words cut deeper than any physical wound could have. "David felt guilty about asking you to leave because you'd given up so much to help him, but he told me privately that he wished you would give us some space." That was a lie. It had to be a lie. David had never said anything like that to me. In fact, he'd thanked me constantly for being there, told me how much my presence meant to him, how grateful he was to have a father who would drop everything to care for him. But the doubt crept in anyway. Had I been too involved? Had I overstepped boundaries in my eagerness to help my dying son? Had David been too kind to tell me I was smothering him? Mr. Peterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand this is an emotional time, but I'm legally obligated to read David's will to all the beneficiaries he named. Mr. Henry Thompson is specifically mentioned, so he needs to be present for this reading." Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Fine, read your will, but I want it on record that Henry Thompson is not part of this family anymore. Whatever David left him, he can take it and stay out of our lives forever." She sat back down, her arms crossed, her face set in an expression of pure hostility. Emma and Tyler looked mortified by their mother's outburst, but they didn't say anything to defend me. They just sat there, staring at their hands, probably wishing they were anywhere else. Mr. Peterson looked at me with sympathy in his eyes. "Mr. Thompson, would you like to proceed with the reading, or would you prefer to schedule a separate appointment?" I wanted to leave. I wanted to walk out of that office with whatever dignity I had left, and never see Victoria's hateful face again. But I also wanted to hear what David had written, what final words my son had left for the father who had loved him unconditionally his entire life. "I'll stay," I said quietly. "David was my son. I have a right to hear his final wishes." Mr. Peterson nodded and opened the will. "Very well. Let's begin." He started reading the legal language, the formal declarations and definitions that all wills contain. Then he got to the specific bequests, the part where David had tried to take care of the people he loved. "To my beloved wife Victoria, I leave our family home and all its contents, my life insurance policy, my retirement accounts, and my investment portfolio. I trust her to use these resources to provide for our children and to build the future we dreamed of together." Victoria's expression softened slightly as she heard about her inheritance. It was substantial. David had been a successful engineer and had planned well for his family's future. "To my daughter Emma, I leave my college fund contributions and a trust fund that will provide for her education and help her start her adult life. To my son Tyler, I leave a similar trust fund and my collection of baseball memorabilia, hoping he'll remember the games we played together in the backyard." Emma started crying softly, and Tyler wiped his eyes with his sleeve. These were the gifts of a loving father, carefully planned to provide for his children's futures. Then Mr. Peterson got to my part of the will, and his voice became gentler, more personal. "To my father, Henry Thompson, the man who taught me what it means to be a good father and a good man, I leave the following." Victoria's face hardened again as she realized David had indeed provided for me in his will. "I leave my father my workshop and all my tools, knowing he'll appreciate them and maybe use them to build something beautiful in my memory. I leave him my collection of books, especially the ones about history and World War II that we used to discuss for hours." My throat tightened as I remembered those conversations, the Sunday afternoons when David and I would sit in his study talking about books, about history, about life. Those had been some of our best times together. "I leave him my father's watch, the one that belonged to his father and his grandfather before him, trusting him to pass it down to Tyler when the time is right." The watch. I had given that watch to David on his 18th birthday, just as my father had given it to me. It was a family heirloom, a symbol of the connection between generations of Thompson men. "And finally," Mr. Peterson continued, "I leave my father the most important gift I can give him, the knowledge that he was the best father a son could ask for, and the assurance that his grandchildren will always know how much their grandfather loves them." The last part hit me like a physical blow. David had known. He had known that Victoria might try to cut me out of the children's lives, and he had tried to prevent it with his final words. But Mr. Peterson wasn't finished. There's also a personal letter that David asked me to read aloud. He wanted to make sure his father heard these words in front of the family. He pulled out a handwritten letter, and I recognized David's careful script immediately. "Dad," Mr. Peterson read, "if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and I'm sorry I couldn't keep my promise to take care of you in your old age like you took care of me my whole life. You gave up everything to help me through my illness, and I know it wasn't easy for you." Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her chair as the lawyer continued reading. "I need you to know that having you there during my last months was the greatest gift you could have given me. Knowing that my father loved me enough to put his own life on hold to care for me made dying a little less scary." I was crying openly now, not caring what Victoria thought, not caring about maintaining my dignity. These were my son's final words to me, and they were full of love and gratitude. "I'm worried about what will happen to you after I'm gone. I know Victoria is grieving and may not always make the best decisions about family relationships. I'm asking her, through this will, to remember that you are Emma and Tyler's grandfather and that they need you in their lives." Mr. Peterson looked directly at Victoria as he read the next part. "Victoria, I know my father can be stubborn and set in his ways, but he loves our children unconditionally and they love him. Please don't let grief or anger drive a wedge between them and their grandfather. Dad has already lost his wife and his son. Don't make him lose his grandchildren too." Victoria's face was stone, unmoved by her dead husband's plea. "Dad, I know this is hard, but I need you to be patient with Victoria and the kids. Grief makes people do things they wouldn't normally do. Give them time, give them space, but don't give up on them. They need you even if they don't realize it right now." The letter continued with more personal messages, memories of our relationship, expressions of love and gratitude that made my heart ache with loss and pride. When Mr. Peterson finished reading, the office was silent except for the sound of Emma's quiet crying. Tyler was staring at his mother with an expression I couldn't quite read, and Victoria looked like she wanted to be anywhere else in the world. "There's one more thing," Mr. Peterson said, pulling out another document. "David also established a trust fund for his father's care to ensure that Henry has the resources he needs as he ages. The trust is substantial and will provide for housing, medical care, and living expenses for the rest of Henry's life." Victoria's mouth fell open. "How much?" she asked bluntly. "The trust is funded with $500,000 from David's life insurance policy," Mr. Peterson replied. "David was very specific that this money was to be used solely for his father's benefit and could not be accessed by anyone else. $500,000. David had set aside $500,000 to make sure I was taken care of, even though it meant less money for Victoria and the children." Victoria stood up again, her face red with anger. "This is ridiculous. David was sick when he made these decisions. He wasn't thinking clearly. That money should go to his children, not to some old man who's going to die in a few years anyway." Some old man. That's how she saw me now, not as David's father or the children's grandfather, but as some old man who was stealing money from her family. "Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Peterson said firmly, "I can assure you that David was of sound mind when he made these provisions. He consulted with me extensively about his wishes, and he was very clear about wanting to provide for his father's future." "Well, he's provided," Victoria said sarcastically. "Henry has his money and his tools and his books. Now he can take all of it and leave us alone." She turned to me with that same contemptuous expression. "You heard David's letter. He asked you to be patient with us, to give us space. Well, here's all the space you could want. Take your inheritance and stay out of our lives." Emma finally spoke up, her voice small and shaky. "Mom, maybe we should—" "No," Victoria cut her off. "We've been patient enough. We've grieved enough. It's time to move forward, and that means moving forward without constant reminders of the past." Constant reminders of the past. That's what I had become to Victoria. Not a loving grandfather, not a source of wisdom and support for her children, but an unwelcome reminder of her dead husband. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 74 years. "Victoria, I understand you're hurting. I understand you want to build a new life with Richard. But Emma and Tyler are my grandchildren. They're all I have left of David, and I'm all they have left of their father's family." "They have me," Victoria said coldly. "They have Richard. They have his family. They don't need an old man filling their heads with stories about the past and making them feel guilty for moving on." "I would never make them feel guilty for moving on," I said, my voice breaking. "I just want to be part of their lives. I want to watch them grow up, graduate, get married, have children of their own. I want to be their grandfather." "Well, you can't," Victoria said with finality. "That part of their lives is over. David is gone, and with him, any connection you had to this family." Tyler finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mum, he's still our grandfather." Victoria whirled around to face her son. "Tyler, we've talked about this. We're starting fresh. Richard is going to be a father figure to you now. You don't need to be confused by having too many adult influences in your life." Too many adult influences, like having a grandfather who loved him was somehow harmful to Tyler's development. "But Grandpa Henry taught me how to throw a curveball," Tyler said, his voice getting stronger. "He tells me stories about Dad when Dad was my age. He's the only one who remembers Dad as a kid." "Tyler, that's enough," Victoria said sharply. "We're not discussing this here." But Tyler wasn't finished. "Dad's letter said you shouldn't make Grandpa lose his grandchildren too. Dad wanted us to stay close to Grandpa." Victoria's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Your father was dying when he wrote that letter. He wasn't thinking about what would be best for our family going forward." "Maybe he was thinking about what would be best for us," Emma said quietly, speaking up for the first time since the reading began. "Maybe he knew we'd need Grandpa Henry after he was gone." Victoria looked like she wanted to explode. "Girls, we are leaving. Now, Mr. Peterson, please send Henry's inheritance paperwork to his address. We won't be needing any further contact." She started gathering her purse and coat, clearly intending to end this meeting on her terms. Victoria, wait, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. Please, can't we work something out? Can't we find a way for me to see the children sometimes? I'm not asking to interfere in your new life. I just want to be their grandfather. Victoria paused at the door and turned back to me one last time. Henry, let me make this crystal clear. You are not part of this family anymore. You will not be seeing Emma and Tyler. You will not be calling them or texting them or showing up at their school events. If you try to contact them, I'll get a restraining order. A restraining order. She was threatening to get a restraining order to keep a grandfather away from his grandchildren. You have your money, she continued. You have your tools and your books and your memories. That's more than most people get. Be grateful for what David left you and leave us alone. With that, she walked out of the office, with Emma and Tyler trailing behind her. Emma looked back at me once, her eyes full of tears and confusion, but Victoria grabbed her arm and pulled her along. And then they were gone, leaving me alone in the lawyer's office with Mr. Peterson, who looked almost as shaken as I felt. Mr. Thompson, he said gently, I'm so sorry. I've been practicing law for 30 years, and I've never seen anything quite like that. I sank back into my chair, feeling like all the energy had drained out of my body. Is there anything I can do legally? Any way to enforce visitation rights with my grandchildren? Mr. Peterson shook his head sadly. In most states, grandparents have very limited rights when it comes to visitation, unless you can prove that the children are being harmed by not seeing you, which would be very difficult to establish. Victoria has the legal right to control who has access to her children. So that's it. I just lose my grandchildren because my daughter-in-law doesn't want me around? I'm afraid so. I'm truly sorry, Mr. Thompson. David clearly intended for you to remain part of the children's lives. But legally, his wishes don't override Victoria's parental rights. I sat there for a long time after Mr. Peterson finished explaining the legal realities. My son was dead, my wife was dead, and now I was losing my grandchildren too. At 74 years old, I was facing the prospect of spending my remaining years completely alone. The irony wasn't lost on me. David had left me enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life, but what good was financial security without family to share it with? What good were tools and books and watches when there was no one to pass them down to? I drove home in a daze, barely paying attention to the traffic around me. My house felt emptier than ever when I walked through the front door. Eleanor's chair still sat in the living room. David's high school graduation picture still hung on the wall, and Emma and Tyler's artwork from years past still decorated the refrigerator. But now it all felt like a museum of a life that was over, a family that no longer existed. The next few days were the darkest I'd experienced since Eleanor died. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't find any reason to get out of bed in the morning. The money David had left me sat untouched in the bank, while I wondered what the point was of having resources if I had no one to spend them on. I thought about calling Emma and Tyler directly, but Victoria's threat of a restraining order held me back. The last thing I wanted was to cause more problems for the children, or to give Victoria ammunition to use against me. A week after the will reading, I was sitting in Eleanor's chair, staring at the wall and feeling sorry for myself, when the doorbell rang. I almost didn't answer it. I hadn't been in the mood for visitors, and I couldn't imagine who would be coming to see me. But something made me get up and walk to the door, and when I opened it, I found Tyler standing on my front porch, still in his school uniform, his backpack slung over his shoulder. "Grandpa Henry," he said, and his voice was uncertain, like he wasn't sure he'd be welcome. "Tyler," I said, my heart leaping with joy and fear at the same time. "What are you doing here? How did you get here?" "I took the bus after school," he said. "I told Mom I was going to baseball practice, but I came here instead." I looked around nervously, half expecting to see Victoria's car pulling up behind him. "Tyler, your mother doesn't want you here." "If she finds out, I don't care," Tyler said, and there was a determination in his voice that reminded me of David at that age. "She's wrong, Grandpa. What she said at the lawyer's office was wrong." I stepped aside to let him in, my hands shaking with emotion. Having Tyler in my house again, seeing his familiar face, hearing him call me Grandpa, it was like being given water after days in the desert. "Tyler, I'm so glad to see you, but I'm worried about what your mother will do if she finds out you're here." Tyler sat down on the couch, the same couch where he'd spent countless hours playing video games and watching baseball with me. Grandpa, I've been thinking about what Dad wrote in his letter. He said we need you, and he was right. What do you mean? Tyler looked down at his hands, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. Mom's been different since Dad died. She's angry all the time, and she doesn't want to talk about Dad or remember him. Richard doesn't want us to talk about Dad either. He says we need to move forward and focus on the future. My heart ached for this boy who was being asked to forget his father in order to make his mother's new boyfriend comfortable. But I don't want to forget Dad, Tyler continued. I want to remember the stories about when he was a kid. I want to know about our family, about you and Grandma Eleanor. I want to keep Dad's memory alive. Tyler, your father would be so proud of you for saying that. Grandpa, can I ask you something? Of course, son. Will you tell me about Dad when he was my age? Mom doesn't like it when I ask her about the past, but I want to know what he was like when he was 14. For the next 2 hours, I told Tyler stories about his father, about the time David tried to build a tree house and fell out of the tree, breaking his arm. About the summer, he decided he wanted to be a professional baseball player and practiced pitching until his arm was sore. About the day he brought home a stray dog and convinced Eleanor and me to let him keep it. Tyler laughed at the funny stories and asked thoughtful questions about the serious ones. He was hungry for these connections to his father, for these glimpses into the man David had been before he became a husband and father. Grandpa, Tyler said as it started getting dark outside, I have to go home soon, but I want to ask you something. What is it? Would it be okay if I came to see you sometimes? Not all the time, and not when Mom would find out, but sometimes when I really need to talk to someone who knew Dad. My heart broke and soared at the same time. This brave boy was willing to risk his mother's anger to maintain a relationship with his grandfather, to keep his father's memory alive. Tyler, I would love that more than anything in the world, but I don't want you to get in trouble with your mother. I'll be careful, Tyler said. I'll only come when I know she won't find out, and maybe someday, when she's not so angry anymore, she'll change her mind about you. I drove Tyler to a bus stop a few blocks from his house, and as he got out of my car, he hugged me tight. I love you, Grandpa Henry, he said. No matter what Mom says, you're still my grandfather and I'm still your grandson. I love you too, Tyler, more than you'll ever know. That night, I slept better than I had since David's funeral. Tyler's visit had given me something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. Over the next few months, Tyler visited me 6 more times, always carefully, always making sure Victoria wouldn't find out, always hungry for stories about his father and his family history. Sometimes Emma came with him, though she was more nervous about defying their mother. During one visit, Emma told me something that broke my heart. Grandpa Henry, Richard wants to adopt us. He wants us to change our last name to his name. Mom thinks it's a good idea. Change their names. Victoria wanted to erase even that connection to David, to make it as if he had never existed. What do you think about that? I asked Emma. I don't want to change my name, she said firmly. I'm Emma Thompson. That's who I am, that's Dad's name, and I want to keep it. Have you told your mother how you feel? Emma nodded sadly. She says I'm being stubborn and that Richard's feelings are hurt that we don't want his name. But it's not about Richard. It's about Dad. These children were being forced to choose between honoring their father's memory and pleasing their mother's new boyfriend. It was an impossible position for kids their age. The secret visits continued for 3 months until the inevitable happened. Victoria found out. Tyler had been careless, mentioning something about a story I'd told him about David, something Victoria knew she hadn't shared with him. When she pressed him about where he'd heard the story, Tyler tried to lie, but Victoria was too smart and too suspicious. The phone call came at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Henry, Victoria's voice was ice cold. I know Tyler has been visiting you. I know you've been filling his head with stories and turning him against me and Richard. Victoria, I haven't turned him against anyone. Tyler came to me because he needed to talk about his father. He's grieving, and what he needs is to move on with his life, not to be dragged back into the past by a bitter old man who can't accept that David is gone. Bitter old man. First I was just old man. Now I was bitter old man. In Victoria's eyes, I kept getting worse instead of better. I'm not bitter, Victoria. I'm heartbroken. I lost my son and now I'm losing my grandchildren. All I want is to be part of their lives. Well, you can't be. I've told you that repeatedly, but you keep manipulating my children into defying me. That stops now. I never asked Tyler to defy you. He came to me on his own because he needed someone who understood his connection to David. His connection to David is through me, not through you. I'm his mother, and I knew David better than anyone. If Tyler wants to know about his father, he can ask me. But Tyler had asked her and she'd shut him down. She'd made it clear that talking about David made her uncomfortable, that she wanted to focus on the future with Richard instead of dwelling on the past with her dead husband. Victoria, please, can't we find some middle ground here? Some way for me to see the children occasionally without interfering in your new life? No, Henry, there is no middle ground. You've proven that you can't respect boundaries, that you'll go behind my back to manipulate my children. I'm done being patient with you. What does that mean? It means I'm filing for a restraining order tomorrow morning. You are not to contact Emma or Tyler in any way. You are not to come to their school, their sporting events, or anywhere else they might be. If you violate the restraining order, you'll be arrested. The line went dead. Victoria had hung up on me, and with that phone call she had severed the last connection I had to my grandchildren. The restraining order was granted 3 days later. I wasn't even allowed to contest it because Victoria claimed I was harassing her children and interfering with their emotional well-being. The judge, who probably saw dozens of these cases every week, signed the order without much consideration. Just like that, I was legally prohibited from seeing Emma and Tyler. If I came within 500 feet of them, I could be arrested. If I tried to contact them at school or through friends, I could be arrested. If I showed up at Tyler's baseball games or Emma's graduation, I could be arrested. Victoria had used the legal system to make me a stranger to my own grandchildren. The months that followed were the loneliest of my life. I had David's money, but money can't buy you a family. I had his tools, but I had no projects to work on, no one to build things for. I had his books, but reading about other people's lives only reminded me of how empty my own had become. I thought about moving away, starting over somewhere else where I wouldn't be constantly reminded of what I'd lost. But this house held 50 years of memories with Eleanor and 45 years of memories with David. Leaving would feel like abandoning them all over again. Instead, I tried to find purpose in other ways. I volunteered at the local food bank, thinking that helping other people might ease my own pain. I joined a support group for grieving parents, hoping to find others who understood what I was going through. The support group helped some. There were other parents who had lost children, other grandparents who had been cut off from their grandchildren by bitter divorces or family feuds. We shared our stories, our pain, our strategies for coping with loss. But nothing could fill the hole left by Emma and Tyler's absence from my life. I kept track of them from a distance, carefully and legally. I knew when Tyler made varsity baseball as a sophomore because his name was in the local newspaper. I knew when Emma was accepted to college because her high school published a list of graduates and their college destinations. I wanted to be proud of them, to celebrate their achievements, to be the grandfather who cheered from the stands and sent congratulatory cards. Instead, I was a stranger reading about their lives in the newspaper, like they were celebrities I'd never met. 2 years after the restraining order was issued, I got a call that changed everything. "Mr. Thompson, this is Dr. Sarah Martinez from Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling about Tyler Thompson. You're listed as his emergency contact." My blood ran cold. "What happened? Is Tyler okay?" "Tyler was in a car accident this afternoon. He's stable, but he's been asking for you. He gave us your number and said you're his grandfather." "I'll be right there," I said, not even thinking about the restraining order, not caring about the legal consequences. Tyler needed me and nothing else mattered. I drove to the hospital faster than I'd driven in years, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my mind racing with worry and fear. When I got to the emergency room, I found Victoria in the waiting area, her face pale and streaked with tears. She looked up when she saw me, and for a moment, I saw something other than hatred in her eyes. I saw fear and exhaustion, and maybe even relief. "How is he?" I asked, forgetting our animosity in the face of our shared concern for Tyler. "He has a concussion and a broken leg," Victoria said quietly. "The doctors say he'll be fine, but he was unconscious for a while, and when he woke up, the first thing he asked for was you." "Can I see him?" Victoria hesitated, and I could see her internal struggle. She was still angry with me, still wanted to keep me away from her children, but Tyler was hurt and asking for his grandfather. "He's been asking for you for 2 hours," she said finally. The nurses keep asking me when his grandfather is coming, and I keep having to explain that you're not allowed to see him. Victoria, please, I know we have our differences, but Tyler is hurt. Can't we put aside our problems for now? She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something crack in her armor of resentment. 5 minutes, she said. You can see him for 5 minutes, and then you leave. Tyler was in a hospital bed, his left leg in a cast, his head wrapped in bandages, but his eyes lit up when he saw me walk into the room. Grandpa Henry, he said, his voice weak but happy, you came. Of course I came, son. How are you feeling? My head hurts and my leg hurts, but I'm okay. Grandpa, I was so scared. When the car hit us, all I could think about was that I might die without seeing you again. My heart broke hearing those words. This boy had been in a car accident, facing the possibility of death, and his biggest fear was that he'd never see his grandfather again. Tyler, I'm here now. You're going to be fine. Grandpa, I have to tell you something. I never stopped thinking about you, even when Mom said I couldn't see you anymore. I kept all the stories you told me about Dad. I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget them. You wrote them down? Tyler nodded carefully, mindful of his head injury. I have a whole notebook full of stories about Dad when he was a kid, about you and Grandma Eleanor, about our family. I didn't want to forget any of it. This brave, wonderful boy had been preserving our family history in secret, keeping David's memory alive, despite his mother's wishes. Tyler, that means more to me than you'll ever know. Grandpa, can I ask you something? Anything, son. Will you come to my graduation? I know Mom doesn't want you there, but it would mean so much to me if you could come. Before I could answer, Victoria appeared in the doorway. Time's up, Henry. I squeezed Tyler's hand. I love you, Tyler. Get better soon. I love you too, Grandpa. As I walked past Victoria toward the door, she grabbed my arm. Henry, wait. I turned back to her, expecting another lecture about boundaries and restraining orders. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. I know Tyler needed to see you. It was the first kind thing Victoria had said to me in over 2 years. Victoria, he's my grandson. I'll always come when he needs me, regardless of our problems. She nodded, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the woman David had fallen in love with, the woman who had once thanked me for caring for her husband. Henry, I need to think about some things. Tyler's accident made me remember what's really important. What do you mean? I mean, maybe I've been so focused on moving forward that I forgot Tyler and Emma still need connections to their past, to their father, to you. Hope flickered in my chest, but I tried not to let it grow too large. Victoria had disappointed me too many times before. I'm not saying everything goes back to the way it was, she continued, but maybe we can find a way for you to be part of the children's lives again. Maybe David was right when he said they need their grandfather. Victoria, I would like nothing more than that. I've missed them so much. I know you have. And they've missed you too, even though I tried to pretend they hadn't. She paused, looking back toward Tyler's room. Emma cried for weeks after I got the restraining order. She said I was being cruel to you, that Dad wouldn't want us to treat you that way. Emma said that, Victoria nodded. She's been angry with me ever since. She says I took away her grandfather for no good reason, that you never did anything wrong except love us. I do love you, Victoria. All of you. You're my family. I know that now. I think I always knew it. But I was so angry after David died, so hurt and confused, and it was easier to blame you than to deal with my own grief. This was the most honest conversation Victoria and I had ever had, and it was happening in a hospital corridor while Tyler recovered from a car accident. Henry, would you be willing to start over, to try to build a relationship that works for all of us? Of course I would. I've been hoping for that for 2 years. It won't be easy. Richard and I are engaged and he's going to be part of the family. You'll have to accept that. I can accept Richard as long as he accepts me. All I want is to be Tyler and Emma's grandfather. Victoria smiled for the first time since I'd known her. Tyler's graduation is in 3 weeks. If you want to come, I'll make sure you have a seat in the family section. 3 weeks later, I sat in the high school auditorium watching my grandson walk across the stage to receive his diploma. Victoria had saved me a seat next to Emma, who hugged me tight when I sat down. Grandpa Henry, I'm so glad you're here, Emma whispered. I missed you so much. I missed you too, sweetheart. When Tyler's name was called, I stood up and cheered louder than anyone else in that auditorium. He looked out into the crowd, found me, and gave me a huge smile and a wave. After the ceremony, Tyler hobbled over on his crutches and hugged me as best he could with his cast. "Grandpa, thank you for coming. This is the best graduation present ever. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, son." Victoria approached us with Richard beside her. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with kind eyes and an uncertain smile. "Henry," Victoria said, "I'd like you to meet Richard. Richard, this is David's father, Henry Thompson." Richard extended his hand to me. "Mr. Thompson, it's nice to finally meet you. Victoria and the kids have told me a lot about you." I shook his hand, studying his face, trying to gauge whether this man would be an ally or an obstacle in my relationship with my grandchildren. "Please call me Henry, and thank you for being good to Emma and Tyler." "They're great kids," Richard said, "and I can see how much they love you. Victoria's told me how important you are to them." Over the following months, we slowly rebuilt our family relationships. It wasn't always easy. There were still tensions, still moments when old resentments surfaced. But we all worked at it. All tried to put the children's needs first. Richard turned out to be a decent man who genuinely cared about Emma and Tyler. He never tried to replace David in their memories, and he didn't feel threatened by their relationship with me. In fact, he encouraged it, understanding that children need all the love and support they can get. Victoria and I had several long conversations about the past, about our grief, about the mistakes we'd both made. She apologized for cutting me out of the children's lives, and I apologized for not being more understanding of her need to move forward after David's death. "Henry," she said during one of these conversations, "I want you to know that David would be proud of how we've worked things out. He always said that family was the most important thing, and that love was stronger than anger." "David was a wise man," I replied. "He got that from his mother." Victoria smiled. "And his stubbornness from his father." Emma graduated from high school the following year, and I was there in the front row, cheering as loudly as I had for Tyler. She was accepted to the state university with a partial scholarship, and I was able to help with her expenses, using some of the money David had left me. Tyler went on to play college baseball, earning a scholarship to a Division II school. I attended every home game I could, sitting in the stands with Victoria and Richard, cheering for my grandson as he pursued his dreams. At Tyler's wedding 5 years later, he asked me to be his best man. "Grandpa Henry," he said, "you taught me what it means to be a good man, just like you taught my dad. I can't think of anyone I'd rather have standing beside me on the most important day of my life." I stood beside Tyler at the altar, holding David's watch, the one that had been passed down through generations of Thompson men, ready to give it to Tyler as a wedding gift. It was the same watch David had mentioned in his will, the one he'd wanted Tyler to have when the time was right. As I watched Tyler exchange vows with his beautiful bride, I thought about David, about how proud he would have been of the man his son had become. I thought about Eleanor, about how she would have loved to see this day. And I thought about the long, difficult journey that had brought us all to this moment. During the reception, Victoria pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Henry, I owe you an apology that's long overdue." "Victoria, we've been through this. We've both apologized, we've both forgiven. Let's not rehash the past. No, this is different. I need to tell you something I should have told you years ago." She looked nervous, like she was about to confess something important. "When David was dying, in his final weeks, he talked to me about you constantly. He was so worried about what would happen to you after he was gone, so afraid that you'd be alone." "I know that, Victoria. He mentioned it in his letter. But what you don't know is that he made me promise to take care of you. He made me swear that I wouldn't let grief or anger drive a wedge between you and the children." My heart stopped. "He made you promise?" Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He said, Victoria, my dad gave up everything to take care of me. Promise me you won't abandon him when I'm gone. Promise me you'll make sure he stays part of our family." "And you promised him?" "I promised him. And then I broke that promise because I was angry and hurt and looking for someone to blame for David's death. I broke my word to my dying husband, and I've regretted it every day since." I put my arms around Victoria as she cried, this woman who had caused me so much pain, but who was also the mother of my grandchildren, the widow of my son. "Victoria, David would forgive you, and so do I. What matters is that we found our way back to each other. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Henry. I was cruel to you when you were grieving just as much as I was. We all make mistakes when we're in pain. What matters is that we learn from them and do better." As the evening wound down, Emma approached me with a small wrapped package. "Grandpa Henry, Tyler and I have something for you." I opened the package to find a leather-bound photo album. The first page had a picture of David as a baby, held by Eleanor and me. The subsequent pages chronicled David's entire life: childhood, adolescence, college, his wedding to Victoria, the birth of Emma and Tyler. But what made the album special were the handwritten notes on each page, memories and stories written by Emma and Tyler about their father, about their grandmother Eleanor, about me. "We've been working on this for 2 years, Emma explained. "We wanted to create a record of our family history, all the stories you told us about Dad and Grandma Eleanor." Tyler joined us, still in his wedding tuxedo. "Grandpa, we never want to forget where we came from or the people who loved us. This album is our way of making sure Dad's memory lives on." I turned through the pages, reading their carefully written memories, seeing our family's story preserved in their own words. It was the most precious gift I'd ever received. "There's one more thing," Tyler said, pulling out an envelope. "We wrote you a letter." I opened the envelope with shaking hands and read, "Dear Grandpa Henry, we know the last few years have been hard for all of us. We know Mom made mistakes, and we know you were hurt by being separated from us. But we want you to know that you were never really separated from us, because we carried you in our hearts every day. You taught us what it means to love unconditionally, to forgive when it's hard, to never give up on family. You showed us how to honor Dad's memory while still building new relationships. You proved that love is stronger than anger, and that family bonds can survive even the worst storms. We are who we are because of you, because of Dad, because of Grandma Eleanor. We are Thompsons, and we're proud of that name and everything it represents. Thank you for never giving up on us, even when it seemed hopeless. Thank you for being patient with Mom when she was lost in her grief. Thank you for showing us what it means to be a good man, a good father, and a good grandfather. We love you more than words can express, and we promise that our children will know their great-grandfather's story, will understand the legacy of love and strength you've given our family. Love always, Emma and Tyler." I couldn't read the last few lines through my tears. These beautiful, thoughtful young people had grown up to be exactly the kind of adults David would have been proud of, and they credited me with helping to shape them. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. The pain of losing David, the heartbreak of being separated from Emma and Tyler, the slow process of rebuilding our relationships. It had all led to this moment of complete family unity. David's money had ensured my financial security, but it was his children's love that had given my life meaning. His tools sat in my workshop, but it was the values I'd passed down to Emma and Tyler that were my real legacy. His books lined my shelves, but the stories I'd shared with my grandchildren were the ones that would outlive us all. 6 months later, Emma announced her engagement to a young man named Michael, who reminded me a lot of David at that age. Kind, hard-working, devoted to family. When I met Michael for the first time, he shook my hand firmly and said, "Mr. Thompson, Emma talks about you all the time. She says you're the strongest man she knows, and I can see why. I hope someday I can be half the grandfather to my children that you've been to Emma and Tyler." At Emma's wedding the following spring, she asked me to walk her down the aisle. "Grandpa Henry," she said, "my dad can't be here to give me away, but I can't think of anyone who represents our family better than you." As I walked Emma down the aisle, I felt David's presence with us, felt Eleanor's love surrounding us, felt the weight and joy of being the patriarch of a family that had survived loss and betrayal and emerged stronger than ever. Victoria and Richard had been married for 3 years by then, and their relationship had brought stability and happiness to our family. Richard had never tried to erase David's memory or replace him in the children's hearts. Instead, he'd honored David by loving his children and accepting his father as part of their extended family. During Emma's wedding reception, Richard approached me with a glass of champagne and a serious expression. "Henry, I want to thank you for something." "What's that, Richard?" "For showing me what it means to be a good stepfather. Watching how you've loved Emma and Tyler, how you've put their needs first even when it was difficult, taught me how to love them too. Richard, you've been good to those kids. David would be grateful for the way you've cared for his family." "I hope so. I know I can never replace their father, but I've tried to honor his memory by being the kind of man he would want in his children's lives. As the evening progressed, I found myself surrounded by family: Victoria and Richard, Emma and Michael, Tyler and his girlfriend Sarah, and several cousins and friends who had remained loyal through all our family's ups and downs. Tyler stood up to make a toast and the room fell quiet. "I want to toast my grandfather, Henry Thompson," he said, raising his glass in my direction. "Grandpa Henry taught me that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about the people who show up for you when life gets hard. It's about the people who love you unconditionally, who forgive your mistakes, who never give up on you, even when you give up on yourself." He paused, his voice getting emotional. "Grandpa Henry lost his son, my dad, but he never lost his faith in our family. Even when we were separated, even when it seemed like we might never be together again, he kept loving us and believing that love would find a way." Tyler looked directly at me. "Grandpa, you saved our family. You showed us that love is stronger than anger, that forgiveness is more powerful than resentment, that family bonds can survive anything if we're willing to fight for them." The room erupted in applause, and I felt overwhelmed by the love and gratitude of these people who had become my whole world. Later that evening, as the celebration was winding down, Victoria sat beside me at the head table. "Henry, do you ever think about what David would say if he could see us now?" I considered her question carefully. "I think he'd be proud of how we've all grown, how we've learned to put love first and ego second. I think he'd be amazed by the adults Emma and Tyler have become. And I think he'd be proud of you for never giving up on us," Victoria added, "for being patient with me when I was at my worst, for loving his children even when I tried to keep them away from you. Victoria, we've all made mistakes. What matters is that we learned from them. I learned something important from you, Henry. I learned that being a good parent sometimes means putting your children's needs ahead of your own feelings. Emma and Tyler needed their grandfather, and I almost took that away from them because of my own anger and fear. But you didn't take it away permanently. You found your way back to what was right. Only because Tyler's accident forced me to see what really mattered. If he hadn't been hurt, if he hadn't asked for you, I might have kept us separated forever. But he did ask for me, and you let me come. That took courage, Victoria. It took love." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the incredible journey our family had taken. From the devastating loss of David, through the painful separation from Emma and Tyler, to the gradual rebuilding of trust and love, we had emerged as a stronger, more appreciative family. The money David had left me had provided security, but it was the relationships we'd rebuilt that had given my life purpose. His tools had given me projects to work on, but it was the time spent with Emma and Tyler that had filled my days with joy. His books had provided entertainment, but it was the stories I'd shared with my grandchildren that had created lasting bonds. Most importantly, David's final letter had proven prophetic. He had asked Victoria to remember that Emma and Tyler needed their grandfather, and eventually she had honored that request. He had asked me to be patient with his family's grief, and that patience had been rewarded with renewed relationships. Now, at 79 years old, I was surrounded by a loving family that included not just Emma and Tyler, but Victoria and Richard, Michael and Sarah, and the promise of great-grandchildren in the years to come. The house that had once felt like a museum of lost memories was now filled with new memories, new laughter, new love. Emma and Tyler visited regularly, bringing their partners and eventually their children. Victoria and Richard hosted family dinners where David's memory was honored alongside celebrations of new milestones. The photo album Emma and Tyler had given me sat on my coffee table, and I looked through it often, remembering not just the past but appreciating how that past had shaped our present. Each picture told a story of love, loss, resilience, and redemption. As I finish telling you this story, I want you to know that it has a happy ending, but not the ending any of us expected. We didn't get to keep David. Cancer took him away despite our best efforts. We didn't avoid the pain of grief and separation. Victoria's anger and my hurt nearly destroyed our family bonds. But we did learn something valuable, that love is stronger than anger, that patience is more powerful than resentment, and that families can heal from even the deepest wounds if they're willing to put love first. So let me ask you this. If you were in my place that day at the will reading, hearing your daughter-in-law say that your family had no place for you, what would you have done? Would you have fought harder? Would you have given up completely? Would you have waited patiently for love to find a way? And tell me, from whatever corner of the world you're listening from, what part of this story touched your heart? Because I believe that every family faces moments when they have to choose between holding on to hurt or choosing to heal, between protecting their pride or protecting their relationships. The will reading that seemed like an ending turned out to be a beginning, the beginning of a journey that taught us all what family really means. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or possessions, but the love that survives even the worst betrayals and emerges stronger on the other side.